Welcome FPL managers to a new pre-season video from Fantasy Football Scout. We're talking all about mid-priced midfielders today, and I'm joined by Sam from FPL Family. How's your FPL team doing, Sam?
It's all right. I think I'm like 3 drafts in now, and there's some that are just constantly there. But then there are others that kind of are in and out, a bit, a bit like a yo-yo at the minute. They're kind of like, oh, I quite fancy you, and then a week later, I'm like, oh, I'm not sure.
I'm
Maybe
impressed it's
this one
only
instead.
draft 3. I'm on draft like 1,000 or something. It's ridiculous. Spend
Thing is,
far
I
too much
think
time.
it's hard though, isn't it? Because sometimes you overthink it. Like I know in seasons gone by, I've definitely been like overthinking it and kind of spending so long talking about it that actually in the end it's kind of like I'm so confused as to what I'm doing. Whereas this season I've kind of tried to take a step back. Once a week I'm doing a draft and then I'm leaving it alone for a week and then going back to it and looking at it again at the end of the next week and making some changes, and that seems to be working all right at the minute.
No, it's
Let's see where we
good.
are.
I mean, the FBL game launched so early, so it's difficult not to tinker. But any time I see suggestions about popular players, I always have to put them in my team and see what I can do with the
Yeah.
rest of the squad. So it is a bit tempting. But today we're talking about mid-priced midfielders, that really important spot on your side because you're looking for value to enable you to get all of the premium options. So let's have a look at all of the options. There's loads to choose from. So mid-price, I'm just going to classify that as we're looking at 5.5 million to 7.5 million, but there aren't actually any 5.5 million players on this chart. So the first caveat I'll make is Stuart Dallas, who has just been reclassified as a midfielder, is now 5.5 in midfield. But the 171 points he got last season would be moved down to about 99 points if you remove his 12 clean sheets. So, bit interesting about Dallas. I'm not sure he has the stats or the previous points potential to interest me. What do you think about Dallas, Sam?
It's really tough this one because I just love Dallas, like for everything that was so good about him last season. But I do get it. Like I think there's maybe potential there if you are really going for budget across most of your positions in order to have like five massive players. Then I could see the potential with Dallas as a really cheap Leeds player. But I think if you've got zero point 0.5 more, you're going to go Harrison. If you've got 1 million more, you're going to go Rafinha. So I think when you compare him to those midfield options, it's probably a no on Dallas, unless you
Yeah.
absolutely have to.
Yeah, I mean, not to mention the bonus points he'd lose on top of
Yeah.
that, because he would be, if he got attacking return and a clean sheet in a game previously, he probably would have got some bonus points. So, yeah, it's an interesting one. You've got Emil Smith Rowe as well as another 5.5 option. If he was on this chart, he'd be further down to that per appearance line. So, not as good as these other options we're going to talk about. So, let's talk about the chart itself. We've got the chances created towards the right, that's the more creative players. And we've got the goal threat towards the top, that's number of shots per appearance. So if we've got a player that's both creative and threatening, they're going to be in the top right-hand corner. The numbers inside the player bubbles, they correspond to the big chance involvement. So the number at the top above the player name is the big chances per appearance, and the number below is the big chances created per appearance. And Sam, you mentioned the 6.0 million, so that seems like a good place to start. You've got Harrison, I've got Ismail Assar. Do you want to start us off with Harrison?
I actually really like both of these. I think both of these are really, really good picks. I have fallen a little bit in love with Harrison during this preseason. He was one of those players that I think at when the game first launched, I'd kind of ruled out because obviously we had returned to Manchester City as his parent club last season. Um, then the permanent deal came in and he goes back to Leeds. And I suddenly thought, oh, that's quite interesting because up until that moment, it had been Rafinha for me all day long. Then I was kind of like, oh, I could save zero point 0.5 here. So let's have a little look at Harrison and his underlying stats. And actually, they look quite good. Obviously, he had 18 goal involvements last season. That was two more than Rafinha managed across the season.
Huge.
Tied second for goals for Leeds with Dallas last year. Only Bamford had more than he did. So the stuff that he was doing on the pitch was fantastic. And now, of course, it's permanent. Now, sometimes that can kind of go the opposite way because, as we've seen with Lingard, when he was on loan, sometimes players that up their game when they're out on loan to either because they want to get a starting position in their parent club or because they want to get a permanent move away. But with Harrison, I think that kind of love affair that he built with Leeds last season, I suspect will continue into the new season. And I think his underlying stats were so promising last time around that I can see myself saving 0.5, which I think you can spend well across the rest of your team by not having Rafinha, because the differences aren't that huge.
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, 6.0 I think is a really useful price point to have. That, as you say, that 0.5 can be spent really well. And I'm amazed, like, Harrison has the most goals and assists on this chart out of any player, which is incredible. I wouldn't have guessed that. So he seems like a really good option. The underlying stats don't seem to compare that well to the other players, but maybe that doesn't matter too much when you've got a really dynamic attacking lead side that could be.
I guess because he's being clinical with the chances that he's getting. So he might not be getting the most big chances or creating the most chances, but the ones that he is doing tend to lead to something. So
absolutely, yeah. And his teammates around him are being clinical as well, converting the chances that he creates. So, definitely one to watch. Are you not put off by the Leeds fixtures? I think they have a tough run. Man United, Everton, Burnley, Liverpool to start off with the first four.
Yeah. It's not ideal, I've got to be honest. But then we saw last time round that Leeds can be really good against the bigger clubs, particularly on the road against the bigger sides. And of course, this time around, we're going to have fans back in stands, which Leeds obviously haven't really been able to take advantage of during their first Premier League season back. So I think that there'll be enough of a boost in that Leeds United side for that to be okay. I do agree with you on Sarr, though. I think the Watford fixtures to start the season look nicer. So if you're going in at 6 million, Sarr might have the better fixtures in terms of that starting point anyway.
Well, that's a wonderful segue into me talking about Sarr. Yeah, Watford's fixtures are pretty good. They're just up on screen now. Aston Villa, Brighton, Tottenham, Wolves. Who was the last one? Was it Norwich? Let me find it. Norwich and then Newcastle finally. So they were a pretty good selection. So Sarr last year played in the Championship, of course, and he had 5 goals and 7 assists. Sorry, no, that was right. That was completely wrong. He had 13 goals and 4 assists in the Championship. So pretty good. When he played in the Premier League the year before for Watford, he had 5 goals and 7 assists. So a fairly decent return. But we've probably seen that level of improvement from him playing one more year for Watford. He seemed to be on penalties occasionally. But I just watched all of his goals and assists the other day, and I was just so impressed by the variety of goals he was scoring. He's got a huge pace, absolutely rapid pace, could destroy anyone, win loads of penalties. Whoever's taking it, whether it's him or whether it's Dini. He was also on penalties, so we don't know whether that's actually the case. But he also can score headed goals as well. He's a tall guy, so it's aerial threat as well. But just look at the numbers from the 2019-20 season, which is what he is on here on this chart. 0.36 big chances, 0.32 big chances created. That's pretty good. If you add it up, that's 0.68. That's one of the highest figures on here. So he's clearly doing well with the bigger chances. I am really tempted by him. Watford's fixtures are good enough to have him from the start. And yeah, him or Harrison. It depends on which other Leeds players you're having, I suppose. But I'm definitely tempted by Sarr.
It's tough though, isn't it? Because I think there's a lot of Watford players that you could potentially go with. His relationship with Firmino down the side is really impressive. The two of them together have a really nice working relationship. And so the majority of the Watford chances are coming from that side of the pitch, which does make him look really attractive. But those defensive stats that Watford post also make their defenders attractive. Plus, if you wanted to, you could go with the keepers and then have 2 goalkeepers guaranteed to have one starting for 8.5. So, and that's where my problem lies with Watford is that, in my back of my head, I'm thinking I might very well go with both goalkeepers here because that's going to save me 0.5. In doing that, that means I've got one spot left across the rest of my side for Watford. And I think Sarr is the obvious choice. But there are other players that are also kind of in that conversation as well. So I'm not sure I want to go into the season tripled up on a newly promoted side. It feels a little bit like...
That seems crazy.
I might have gone all eggs in the Watford basket, which is, I think, why I end up veering towards Harrison a little bit more than I do.
Yeah, that's perfectly understandable. And I think the fact that you are even tempted to go for the Watford goalkeepers is probably an indication that they are a little bit more defensive than attacking, certainly compared to Brentford or maybe Norwich. So That element probably puts me off Sarr a little bit more, but probably not enough not to have him as a 6.0. I think I'm going to stick with my guns with Sarr. You go with Harrison, I'll go with Sarr. We'll see how it goes. But yeah, okay, those are the 6.0 mids. Let's move on to the other players on here. And the talking points are, well, Jesse Lingard is top for shots per appearance. Well, obviously he's not at West Ham now, but he's at Man United. But I do think that he will end up being at West Ham because the amazing amount of players at Man United, I'm not sure he's going to get that chance. And he's looking for regular attacking football. I think he overperformed absolutely by a times 2 of his XG last season.
Yeah, it was crazy.
Crazy. 9 goals, 5 appearances in... 9 goals, 5 assists in 16 appearances, which is insane numbers. Are you tempted at all if he does go to West Ham on a permanent move?
Yeah, if he makes the move, I would be tempted. If he stays at Manchester United, it's a definite no. But if he does make that move and makes it a permanent fixture staying at West Ham, then I do think that he offers some really nice value for money in that position. I mean, you can see where he is on your chart, like the fact that he is getting away so many shots. And of course, this was only over 16 games that he had for West Ham on loan. So he's turned up and he's basically returned in every one of those games by 1 or 2. So it is really impressive stuff from Lingard. And of course, he has scored for Manchester United in pre-season as well. So it's not like his form's just disappeared off a cliff when he's gone back up north. He does seem to be kind of still continuing to work hard and he is pushing for a move. So I suspect that he will be quite a differential going into the season because I don't think many people are looking at Lingard, but he does have the scope to offer you something really differential. And the West Ham fixtures look fine. The thing that puts me off slightly is the ability to play on 2 fronts with the Europa League as well as the Premier League. I'm not sure whether the West Ham squad is deep enough to cope with both of those competitions. Yeah. And that worries me a bit, and particularly with Antonio and his injury record. Like if you lose him out of the side again, what does that mean for the rest of the players in that side? So I think they need to sign some players over the summer. But if they do, and if Lingard goes there full time, then it could be a nice pick.
Yeah, no, absolutely. They haven't got huge strength in depth at West Ham, as you say. And Antonio's hamstrings, we talked about it last week with Rob. Lingard, he hasn't had a full season of football for a very long time. So it's going to be interesting. If he does go to West Ham, I think I'll probably leave it and see whether he continues that red-hot form that he ended the season with. But certainly probably not someone I'm going to start the season with. So that probably ends it on Lingard. Let's move on. We've got Madison there to the right of him, and I think he's a fairly popular pick this year for some reason. Not sure why, because yes, he's had a few goals. He had 8 goals, 7 assists, and he had an injury, so he only played 31 appearances. So there's decent numbers, but the problem for Madison, and I never really go with him, is because he always relies on insane goals from outside the box. And they're just not, from my perspective, they're just not predictive. And I don't want to have a player that just could go on a run of form where he scores loads of those goals and then a barren period where he just doesn't convert any of them. And you can see those in the numbers inside his little bubble. The 0.03 big chances per appearance. That is the lowest, one of the lowest figures I've seen. And that just shows the shots that he does have are always really, really low, really, really high difficulty, I should say. And the 0.19, that worries me a little bit as well. That suggests a lower average chance quality that he creates for his teammates, which is very surprising. Maybe the Harvey Barnes, maybe the other players in Leicester are better suited to creating chances for Iheanacho and Jamie Vardy. So I'm not convinced by Madison. What do you think?
It's interesting because actually I always say if Vardy's not there, Madison's less of an option. And if Madison's not there, Vardy's less of an option, because I think those two together work quite well. And the Vardy needs Madison for that link between the defence and the midfield. But I think what we saw last season is that when it was Harvey Barnes that they really missed, and it was only then when they replaced him with Iheanacho and had that kind of double up top that we don't often see at Leicester, that we got some real traction and some really positive results from the Foxes going forward. So Of the two, I'm actually more tempted to go with Barnes this season. Now, of course, they've priced them at the same point because they love to make us choose between the teammates across each of the sides. So
7 million for both,
7 million for both. Barnes had less appearances last season, like 6 less appearances than Madison did. So that's going to kind of have an impact, of course. But in terms of goals, Barnes had 1 more than Madison did. Madison did get more assists than Barnes. So you're kind of making a straight choice between, do you want somebody that's got more assist potential and going to create more chances, or do you want somebody that's going to have more shots and therefore more goal threat? And for me, I think the way that Leicester are, I would rather go with Barnes, because I think what we've seen over the course of last season is that when they play somebody up top alongside Vardy in the way that they have with Iheanacho, and the way that Barnes does when he's fit, they're more productive going forward. And therefore, I'm more tempted to go Barnes over Madison, which is something that if you'd have asked me this time last year, I never would have thought I would say.
I tend to agree with you, to be honest. I think Barnes has that more goal threat. He's more direct, and he might change the shape for Leicester once again, which might put Iheanacho's spot at risk. But Leicester's fixtures are pretty good. They're third on the fixture ticker. Wolves, West Ham, Norwich, Man City's a difficult one, Brighton, and then Burnley. So very good fixtures to start off. Tempted to go Barnes, but that 7 million price point is maybe just 0.5 too high for me with the current structure of my squad. So if you've got money to spend on a 7 million, then probably Harvey Barnes is one to consider. Let's move on to some other players. I think Raphinha and Mount is an interesting comparison. Very similar players. I think they had a similar output last season. 13 attacking returns for Mount, 16 for Raphinha in similar number of appearances. They have more creativity than they do shots, but nevertheless, both of them are really good for the number of quantity. So it's an interesting one. Both of them, their respective teams, Leeds and Chelsea, have a pretty poor start to the season in terms of fixtures. Yeah. So do either of them tempt you, Sam?
It's tough on this one because I actually do really like both of them. Mount is obviously going to cost $1 million more, and $1 million over having Raphinha, I think, is a challenge. Like that's a difficult place to be. But having said that, I do think that Chelsea are going to have a really good season, and if they do, Mount is going to be at the heart of that for me. So he is the one Chelsea player that I'm still looking at, even regardless of the fixtures, thinking somebody in that side is going to kind of drive them forward, and I suspect it will be you. Whereas I look at Raphinha and I think, well, I could save a little bit and have Harrison, or I could go with the defenders because we know what scope you've got there with the Leeds defence, as we saw with Dallas last season. So there are other options at Leeds, whereas I don't know that there are really secure options at Chelsea that aren't Mount, because we're yet to really understand who Tuchel favours going forwards. And of course, there's a lot of transfer rhetoric about who may come in for Chelsea. So I think with Mount, I'm going to wait and see, on the basis that, as you mentioned, the fixtures aren't that great. So let's see where we are a few game weeks into the season. And with Raphinha, I am tempted to just save myself a little bit and go Harrison.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think, Mount obviously had a good Euros campaign, but I think the interesting thing about these two teams is I think they're both on a point of change. So the conversion was absolutely stark for both of them last season. Chelsea was so poor with conversion, created a lot of chances, but the likes of Timo Werner had a terrible, terrible conversion rate. So if Mount is setting up chances for Timo Werner, he's just missing them. It just reduces Mount's potential. But if we see a different Timo Werner, if we see a different Kai Havertz, if we see a different Chelsea altogether, and Mount is just continually feeding all of those balls into the box, he could have a really good season. And if Chelsea improve their conversion on the whole, that just makes him a much more attractive option. On the other hand, 100%. Raphinha, Leeds' conversion was sky high. So if Bamford starts missing the chances that he, where it was exceptional for last season, then that reduces his potential a little bit. So there's a bit swingy in both of them. I think it's an interesting dilemma, but I completely agree with you. I think they're both wait and sees for me with the fixtures. And if we do see those conversion figures change, then we have a little bit more knowledge to choose which one in the future. So, it's interesting. Right, let's talk about the elephant in the room. And that's your man, Mr. Dele Alli. People are going, why on earth is Dele Alli on this chart? Well, he didn't have a very good season last year, mainly because he didn't play much at all under Mourinho. So his numbers on this chart are from the season beforehand. So why don't you run us through why you've picked Dele Alli?
I don't think Dele Alli would like to be referred to as the elephant in the room. I think so. I can honestly say that this one isn't a Spurs bias either, because if it was a Spurs bias, I certainly necessarily wouldn't have pulled out Ali. But when you look at the underlying stats for Dele Alli over the last few seasons, actually they are good, and he has been doing the right things. And what I think we saw last season is, obviously, had a very difficult time of it under Mourinho. We thought in pre-season that it was going to be the making of Dele Alli playing under Mourinho, and it tended to actually be the breaking of Dele Alli over the course of the season. But did come back in under Ryan Mason and did show form towards the back end of the season. And I think what we see when we look at the underlying stats for last year is that he was the third best Spurs player for minutes per goals last season, behind Kane and Son, which, when you think about actually the minutes he got, is a really quite impressive stat. He was sixth best for XGI across the Spurs team last season. If you take Gareth Bale out, of course, because he won't be there this season, then he was fifth best. And the same for XG, was fourth best. Take out Gareth Bale, and he's really only sitting behind Kane and Son. So there is some really good stuff there. And at 6.5 million, you don't very often get buy-in to a player like Dele Alli at that price point. And then, as you say, these stats that you've got on the screen are from the 19-20 season. So his shots that he's getting, the stats are really nice. And when you add the two together with the chances that he's creating, you've got a really nice set of underlying numbers there.
Yeah.
For a player that nobody's going to pick. Very, very few people are going to go into the season owning Dele Alli, because either they got bitten last year with the Mourinho sagas, or because the Spurs fixtures are very mixed, to say the least. So game week 1, obviously, it's Manchester City, but then there are 3 relatively nice fixtures in there with Wolves, Watford and Palace. After that, then it's Chelsea and Arsenal, which are difficult London derbies. But there's scope in there, I think, for Dele Alli. We've seen him score in pre-season. We've seen the link up with Son come back again. We've also heard Nuno Espirito Santo talking about how he wants to play him as a number 10 behind Harry Kane. And if he's going to play in there, you've basically got an out-of-position midfielder playing as a striker. So
yeah. No,
what's not to like?
Absolutely.
That was a sales pitch and a half, wasn't it?
It's a very convincing case. I'm bringing him right into my team. No, it's crazy. 0.9% owned. So he's flying under the radar, absolutely. And that's because he hasn't been prolific over the last 3 seasons. But we do forget that he was a sort of 170 to 225 points a season guy back in, 4, 5, 6 years ago. So for him to be now 6.5 million, having sort of been wandering the wilderness a little bit, like Mesut Ozil or whatever. Sorry to draw that comparison for a Spurs fan. Yeah, I might edit that out. No, I think from what you said, and from the numbers from 1920, which I didn't really consider him to be prolific, if you combine those big chance involvements, 0.56, 0.24... 0.8 is the highest big chance involvement out of all of these players. Jotter's slightly behind at 0.79, but I mean, that just blew my mind a little bit. And as you say, if he plays number 10 and he plays many, many more games this season, then he could be a really, really jammy pick. And I know you love a jammy pick.
Love a jammy pick.
Love a jammy pick.
This one's interesting, because I think for me, I'm not sure how many Spurs players you're going to have in your team going into game week 1. Obviously, we don't know what's happening with Kane yet. And even if he is still a Spurs player, he's unlikely to be there for game week 1 because of the international duty that he's been on.
Yeah.
So going into game week 1, it's a tough fixture against Manchester City. So I don't think many FPL managers are going to invest in any Spurs. But going into game week 2 and be for those next 3 weeks with Wolves and Watford and Palace, I don't see any reason why Dele Alli can't be a really nice cheeky pick that comes in for those fixtures.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I hadn't even considered him until you said I'm going to pick Dele Alli. So I was actually quite surprised, having done a little bit of research myself on potentially what a good option he might be. So you've heard it here first, everyone. Right, we've got plenty of other people to discuss. The other one I really want to consider is Buendia, who's moved from Norwich to Aston Villa this season. Had a really good campaign with Norwich in the Championship last season. 15 goals, 16 assists in the Championship, which is excellent, 6.5 million. When he played for Norwich in the previous season in the Premier League, 1 goal, 7 assists. And that doesn't sound much, but Norwich only scored, 26 goals in the whole campaign, which is significantly less. Just to put that into perspective, Aston Villa last season scored 55 goals, more than double what Norwich scored. So the propensity for maybe Buendia to score a few more FPL points than he did a couple of years ago is huge. And I think he will hit the ground running at Villa. Already in pre-season, we've seen a few really, really decent assists for Watkins. Opposition, not great, so take that with a pinch of salt. But his numbers here certainly do compare well in terms of the numbers of chances created, second after Mason Mount. His big chances created isn't as good, but again, he was playing for Norwich a couple of years ago, and they didn't have too much going on. So I think those numbers are going to massively improve for Buendia, and at 6.5, he could be the main competitor to Dele Alli. I'm going to choose Buendia. You're going to choose Dele Alli.
Might have both, to be honest. I mean, the way I'm tempted to do my team is to fill it a lot with these nice cheap budget options who I think have got potential, because that's going to allow me to have more of those heavy hitters that I also want to have across my team. So for me, Buendia is one that I've looked at in quite a lot of detail because I like him alongside Harrison and Ali in a kind of three-man let's go at cheap options in the middle. Last time he was in the Premier League was third for chances created behind just KDB and Grealish. So that's quite remarkable that, you know, when you think about how few goals Norwich scored, had Norwich actually managed to convert some of the chances that he created last time round in the Premier League, we would see his numbers on this chart be much, much higher than they were. And of course, in the Championship last season, we did see that 30 goal involvements across the league last time out. He was player of the season for the Championship. He was just... everything good about Norwich last year seemed to be coming through Buendia, and I do worry a little bit about Norwich without Buendia going into the Championship. But what a cracking buy I think this is for Aston Villa, regardless of whether Grealish is there or not. I think if Grealish stays at Aston Villa, then this three-man attack of Buendia and Grealish and Watkins looks to be the perfect storm for FPL managers. But even if Grealish goes, we've seen enough in pre-season to see that Buendia and Watkins' relationship is building. And yeah, you've mentioned the fixtures are what they are in pre-season, but they're using the time to kind of bed in. Buendia's had a whole pre-season with Watkins, so I think he is a really nice pick, and I can see why he'll be popular in the game. I think it's just the thing that puts me off slightly with Buendia is it's the first three fixtures of the season that you really want him for. So you don't really have that time to wait and watch. You have to just go for it with Buendia, knowing that at game week 4, things take a little bit of a turn in terms of the fixtures for 4 weeks. So if we invest in Buendia, you're doing it for the first 3 weeks. What you don't want is for Buendia to go mental in game week 1 and then you'd be scratching around trying to bring him in. I think you either go for it in game week 1 or you wait beyond game week 6-ish and then bring him in then 6-7.
No, it is a dilemma, and I completely get your side of the point. I think you could look at it slightly differently and go, well, if you bring him from game week 1 and a lot of people wait and he just completely destroys the opposition in the first 3 game weeks, people aren't going to bring him in because of the tough fixtures in 4 and 5. People will miss the boat a little bit. Whereas I think if he does really well in the first 3 fixtures, you'll probably look to keep, maybe because of the price point, that 6.5. Chelsea and Everton, Chelsea look strong defensively, but Everton, that's an accessible fixture.
Who knows? Yeah.
Who knows?
New manager.
Who knows? So I think, Buendia is a really strong option. Really tempted to have him instead of Grealish. But I mean, Grealish he does look good though.
I'd have Buendia over Grealish all day long.
Yeah. I think 1.5 million cheaper. Yeah.
It's the price.
It's probably a safe bet. So yeah, Buendia is a strong option, definitely recommended from us. I think he's in my side along with Ismail Assar, so that's testament enough. And you said he was in your side as well? Currently?
He's in my draft, yeah.
He's
currently,
in your draft.
Yeah, he is,
well, that says it all. We rate him. Right, let's move on to a couple of other players. We've got Zaha sitting there, and we've got Patrick Vieira as coming in for Palace, exclaiming that he's going to make them more attacking minded.
Yeah.
Zaha.
Good luck.
Yeah, I mean, Eze and Zaha. The problem is Zaha does tend to have injury worries every season, but he is nevertheless a very good player. Do you think Palace are going to get that much more attacking to warrant having Zaha on your team?
It's really tough, this, isn't it? Because obviously we're going to be without Eze for the early part of the season. The fixtures are awful for Crystal Palace. They do not have a great start. So yes, Vieira's coming out and saying, I want to play like more possession football. I mean, that's like a fundamental change from what we saw from Palace last season, when they had one of the lowest possession rates in the league. I think they were third least most possession across the league last year. So we're talking about a total change of style. Also, probably a total change of personnel at Crystal Palace as well, because I think they had 11 players that contracts expired at the end of last season. So for Zaha, this is going to be quite a big season. It's going to be a big learning curve. Actually, his underlying stats for last season were a lot better than I thought they were going to be. When I looked at him, I thought Zaha had a terrible season last year, but XG of 10.1, an XA of 3.85, and an XGI of 11.95. So it wasn't horrendous by any stretch of the imagination. It was kind of there in terms of what was expected of him. He just never really got going. But we do know with Zaha, he is a purple patch player. We also know that he loves to impress. So new manager, he's going to want to get out there and put his name, on the manager's good books, for want of a better phrase. I'm still not convinced that he really wants to be a Crystal Palace player. And of course, that always makes for an interesting dynamic, because do they try and play their way into a transfer? He's not somebody I'll pick on the basis that the fixtures are not anywhere near like I would like to touch. And I really do want to see what Vieira does with this side before I invest in Palace. Yeah. But maybe it's first wild card time, depending on when you're going to play it, when the fixtures shift. If you're looking at somewhere in around game week 6 and 13 for a first wild card, then that might be the perfect opportunity to pick a Palace player. If, and it's a big if, Zaha has actually done something in these opening few weeks, because I think the fixtures are hard enough that he could get nothing for weeks.
No, I completely agree. You're spot on. He's a purple patch player, and there's no way I'm having a Palace player on my side with the fixtures. So it is a really good, audition period to see how he's doing. But I mean, it's interesting, as you were saying, he actually did surprisingly well. Not only was it Rafinha, Gunduan, and Harrison got more attacking returns than him.
Yeah, which is really surprising, right? Having watched Palace all year, I never saw that from him when I was watching. But you look at the stats, it's like, wow, actually, the stats do support picking him.
Well, he did have a change of position last year, certainly at the start of last season, where he started playing centre forward. He's got a lot more goal threat playing central than he does on the left wing. So if he continues to do that, definitely worth monitoring, but definitely not from the start, I don't think. Right, let's move on to the City boys. We've got Gunduan and Ferrantores there, and really interesting double act, because Gunduan, I think, is pretty nailed in that side, and he does have a propensity to get up to that, to the box and score. And he had that amazing period where he got tons of goals, 0.5 per appearance for big chances, which is insane for someone who is meant to be a centre mid. What do you reckon about Gunduan? Is he going to replicate what he did last season, or would there be a sufficient change in the City squad to sort of make him a non-option?
Oh, it's Pep again, isn't it? Like, it's so difficult to know with all the changes. I mean, if they sign Harry Kane, what does that mean? Are they then going to lose players like Sterling to fund that or to make space? Obviously, no Aguero this time. It's tough, but I think with Gundogan, what you do get is security of starts, which is something that you don't get across a lot of the Manchester City players and a lot of the picks. You certainly don't get it with Torres. And when you have a little look at him in terms of his returns last season versus anyone else that's registered at under 7.5 in the game, he is by far the standout pick in terms of most of these areas. 14 big chances for him, which was the most out of everybody else that's valued in under 7.5 in the game this year. I really like Gundogan. Slightly concerns me when KDB is also there, that we don't quite get the attacking Gundogan that we got when KDB wasn't there. So the stats are slightly skewed by the KDB, is he there, is he not there stuff.
Sure, absolutely.
And obviously, if we get KDB fully fit all season, then that might have a long-term impact on Gundogan. But I think there's potential there to take a risk. It's just the price of him. When you're talking about him in comparison, he's the same price as Mount, he's the same price as Jotter, he's the same price as Greenwood. Those three, I think, have all got potential to return more for their teams
That's
than
interesting.
Gunduan has.
Yeah, it's about the position, isn't it? We go back. We want players that are playing in attacking positions. And yes, Gunduan did have the propensity to get up, but there's too much doubt. There's too much worry about the rotation in terms of the personnel around him.
Position on the pitch, yeah.
Yeah, does Phil Foden start getting a more regular role in that centre midfield with De Bruyne? Does Gundogan drop back? Does he start getting rotated? Does Bernardo Silva start taking his spot if Mahrez plays out on the right more regularly? There's too much doubt in my mind about it, and I just need to see him play. If he plays 6 games in a row, I might start considering him. But the fact we all picked him last season because he was 5.5 million at some point.
Yeah.
He's now 7.5 with more uncertainty about the future of his FPL career. So he's probably a no for me with Gunduan. As you say, there's plenty of other options to choose from. Ferrantores is a bit of an interesting one because
he's an enigma, this one.
He's a bit of an enigma. Pep did say that he had curiosities about playing him at centre forward, and that puts Jesus's FPL potential a little bit down. But Ferran Torres at centre forward, if they don't sign Harry Kane, is potentially super exciting for FPL. 7 million, I think he is. So
he is. But we have heard this from Pep before. Like, we have heard him say before, play Torres up top and then he doesn't, or I'll play this one up top and then he doesn't. So that does really concern me. Like, so Jesus, I think he's a non-option. I just can't see him playing him, particularly if Kane arrives. But even if Kane doesn't, I think, we've seen him play KDB up there before. We've seen him play Torres up there before. Like, there's plenty of other players that can be moved position. For me, with Torres, you can't... If he was 6.5, I think the conversation is there. But at 7.5 million... Oh, no, sorry, how much is he? But at 7 million. 7 million.
Yeah.
At 7 million... You have a player who just doesn't get enough starts. 15 of them last time around. It just feels like for that money, I want somebody that's like I can spend 6.5 on, Rafinha, Buendia, Sarr, Ali, all of these guys guaranteed to start pretty much.
Yeah.
With Torres, I've got to pay more. And there's going to be games where he just doesn't show up because that's what Pep does.
I think he's going to be one of those players that if he gets a run of games and starts scoring regularly, then people go, oh, I've got to ditch all of my players to get Torres because he's the guy at City who's starting to score. And we did see, him starting to do that at the end of last season for City. We just need a little bit of certainty about what we can expect every week. Does he play most of the games? Is he just complete non-option? We'll just have to see. And I think both of those City boys are a wait and see for me.
Yeah, they are for me too. Plus, you've got game week 1s against Spurs, so it's not exactly like they've got the best start to the season either. So we can afford, I think, to wait and see with those City players. And also see when the transfer window eventually closes, who is there and therefore who you're going to want to be invested in.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think City probably are the team, maybe with Liverpool, that are a little bit fixture-proof because that they could score a couple of goals against Spurs, but it'll be interesting to see how they line up at Spurs and then how they line up at Norwich because if Pep just completely changes his approach which he probably will, those very contrasting games, so we're going to see two massively different lineups, I think. So it'll be interesting to monitor. I don't think I will be going for either of those players straight off the bat, but definitely worth considering maybe in the future once we get a few more pieces of information. Right, so a few more players to cover. I'm going to cover a few more players quickly that I don't think are options. Ward-Prowse, he got a good number of returns last season, 15 attacking returns, but the thing about Ward-Prowse is he just puts a wonderful free kick in, and he did that like nearly every game. He didn't, but it just seemed like every single free kick goes in with him. I just don't think that can happen all the time, and I just can't pick a player that I just rely on with wonder free kicks.
No, and Southampton without Danny Ings, if he leaves because he said he wants to, doesn't inspire confidence for me. So
although it does probably put Ward-Prowse on penalties again.
Yes, but I just feel like Danny Ings is the heartbeat of that Southampton side, and if he goes, who they replace him with is going to be quite important in terms of whether Ward-Prowse, KWP, whether any of those Southampton players actually become a good option, because I don't think they're going to want to go into the season with just Adams up top if Danny Ings isn't there. So it's a no from me, but if you want to go rogue and be really different, then go for it.
Yeah, no, I'm not convinced by Ward-Prowse, and nor am I convinced about Trossard either. I think Brighton, while they continue to just massively underperform, I just don't want to go next to a Brighton player, even though they look exciting to watch. And Trossard's big chance involvements aren't nearly as good as any of these other players, which sort of says it all, really. He's very exciting to watch, very busy, creates lots of chances, has lots of shots, but most of them are from outside the box. And you just have to rely on that conversion, which he probably doesn't have that much. So I'm staying away from Trossard as well.
And at 6.5 million, you know, you're talking about the same as all those guys around him, like Rafinha, Neto, Saka, Ali, Sarr, like all of them, the stats look better. And they're playing in teams that attack with more gusto than Brighton do. Brighton just don't have. They're solid defensively, but they don't have that same kind of go power going forward. So
no,
I think if you're going Brighton, you're going defenders, not attackers.
Yeah, absolutely. It was going to be Lamptey before he was expected to miss the start of the season, but yeah, maybe Sanchez is the only player I'm probably going to go with from Brighton. Yeah. Let's have a look at some other players. Jotter is an interesting one for me. He has the highest big chance per appearance on this chart. So he's clearly a goal merchant, very, very selfish, which is what you want in FPL. 9 goals last season, 0 assists, which sort of says it all. But he didn't play half the season. He only had 19 appearances, and that was mainly stemming from that injury. So a bit of a doubt with Jotter is if he actually gets in the Liverpool team, if he manages to get a starting spot, because surely Mane, Firmino, Salah just continue to start up top. Klopp needs to keep it consistent, doesn't he? What do you think?
I think Liverpool's best performances when he had all 4 of them playing last season, to be honest. And I don't know, for me, and I know that I'm not in the majority here, I thought Mane had a particularly poor season last year, to the point where I wasn't convinced that he'd still be a Liverpool player going into this season. I'm still not totally convinced that he wouldn't go somewhere else. Like, I think the Liverpool team, obviously living with a Liverpool fan, I feel like they are in a bit of a transition period in the same way that Spurs are. Like, you know, they had the success that Spurs didn't. And then this season that we've just had, they had some real difficulties with injuries to big players. Jotter was one of those. But they kind of feel like they're in a transition where the Salah, Mane, Firmino thing just wasn't as successful as it was in seasons gone by. And when you put Jotter in there, what you saw is a bit of a shake-up of it. And it worked better for me when he was present. So I think Klopp will play him a lot more going into this season. I can see him being an important part of the Liverpool team, which is why he's been in every draft that I've made so far. I've had the double up of the Liverpool midfield with him and Salah. I really like everything that he does. And I think I think our concerns maybe would have been less had he not got injured last year, because I suspect he was on a good run when he got injured. And I think that would have continued over the course of the rest of the season. And of course, the injury kind of broke that up a little bit. So going into the new season, I'm all about the double up in midfield for Liverpool. The fixtures are great. I don't think that defensively they're going to be solid, hopefully, but we don't know when Van Dijk is back, and it's not looking like it's going to be for game week 1 anymore. So going forward with the double up seems to make a lot of sense in my mind.
I'm just super confused about the team dynamic. What the team dynamic will be if he plays, because presumably he's going to have to drop one of Mane, Firmino or Salah if he plays in a 4-3-3 anyway.
Yeah.
So I just don't know. Firmino obviously has been underperforming in terms of FPL, but he's a very good enabler for Mane and Salah on the pitch.
Sure.
So he's sort of the guy that keeps it all together. And once you take him off, you've basically got 3 big egos at the top of the pitch in Jotter,
Yes.
Mane and Salah. So
yeah, you have.
They're not going to maybe gel.
You don't pass to each other.
Exactly. So it's going to be an interesting one. And I want to see the first few games before I consider Jotter, I think, because if Salah, Mane, Firmino start playing more regularly, Klopp goes back to the good old days where they just gelled, they just worked, they played every game together, and they just had that understanding rather than shaking it up a little bit. I know what you're saying about Liverpool.
I just
looked
can't
better
see it. I can't see him not playing him.
I'm just confused. That's my main. I'm just confused about where Jota's going to play. If he does play in that left wing, where does Mane play? Does he play at the top? I'm not sure. Maybe he does.
For another team?
Oh, maybe.
I don't know. I just think that there's going to be... I think there's change coming at Liverpool. Whether it's this season or whether it's next season, I think that there is change in those big three. And I think you're right about Firmino. I think he gets a lot of stick for not picking up FPL points in the way that he should. But for me, what he does is what Kane does at Spurs. It's just that he doesn't necessarily also get the goals that go alongside it. But he makes the space. He enables the goals to be scored across the rest of the squad. So you can't leave him out easily because he's the one that's kind of the creative heartbeat of the side. Then you've got Salah, who, even when he's having an off season, which is apparently what he had last year, he still nearly gets golden boot and is right up there with the top scorers. So you're not going to drop him. Mane, for me, was the one weaker link in that front three last season. And there were games I watched him where I thought, argue done with Liverpool. Yeah. Like not because I think you've become a bad player, but have you done everything that you wanted to do with that club? As in you've won everything now. Like, are you ready for a new challenge? And I don't see that with Salah. I don't see that in Salah's eyes, but I can sort of see that in Mane's. So I'll be interested to see what happens there. There's been no links with him going anywhere else that I've heard of anyway. I'm just not convinced. I think Jotter is there for a reason, and I don't think that reason is to sit on a bench.
No, I agree with you. I'm just, as I said, I want to see a few games to see what Klopp chooses to do. I think he's a great option if he does play the majority of them. So yeah, I am jealous of you if you do start with him and he starts hauling. I'll have to restructure my team and get him in. Yeah, no, it's interesting, but okay, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it though, Jotter. Let's move on. Let's talk about Mason Greenwood. He's got such potential, and he had plenty of appearances last season, but most of them were from the bench. And while they've had an influx of players at Man United, does that limit the amount of time that he further plays at Man United?
Maybe, but then the Rashford news maybe gives him more game time. Like, there's part of me that thinks that in this early part of the season, when the fixtures are really nice, while we don't have Rashford because of his shoulder problem, do we see more of Greenwood? And if we do see more of Greenwood, actually, at the price, he might provide some really good value.
How much is he? 7.5?
Yeah, so I'm kind of intrigued with him. He's one that I think you go in Bruno. It depends on how else you want to do it. So for me, I don't like to start the season tripled up, really, if I can avoid it. Unless there's like the perfect storm of fixtures and the perfect players. I like to start the season with just two. So I've always got somewhere to go if somebody bangs. So with Greenwood and Manchester United, there's Bruno, who I just don't think you can overlook. And then I quite fancy one of the defenders. So it was going to be Luke Shaw, but let's see what's happening with his ribs. Wan-Bissaka's underlying stats for last season were good, so were Harry Maguire's. But the defence looks solid and the fixtures look nice. So because of that, I'm probably likely to not go Greenwood.
Yeah, I think there's so many options out there that he just tends to fly under the radar. You've got the Sancho, you've got
Sancho's
Fernandes. And you've also got Dean Henderson, who's a decent shout of 5 million if he starts at number one, which is reported that he might do. So yeah, he's flying under the radar, but he could be an option at 7.5. I'm not massively convinced myself. He's got to battle Martial for that left wing with Rashford out, or he battles Cavani for that centre forward spot. And
Cavani can't play every game, so that's the other thing, isn't it? Like, Cavani, it's become apparent that he can't play Champions League and Premier League week upon week upon week. So there is going to be game time for Greenwood. It's just, is it enough? I suppose it's a similar conversation to what we had with Torres. Is the game time going to be enough to warrant the price?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think we'll leave the Greenwood discussion there. It's an interesting one, maybe to monitor, but certainly not for me from the outset. Too many other exciting Man United options out there. Right, well, I think we've only got a few more to discuss. Bukayo Saka is up next for Arsenal, and Arsenal have a good 5 fixtures. They're Brentford to start off, then a couple of difficult ones in Chelsea and Man City, followed by Norwich and Burnley. So it's a mix of fixtures, but 3 out of the 5 I'd say are easy fixtures or accessible ones to target. And Saka had obviously a great campaign at the Euros for England, and he really impressed a lot of people, as he did in the Premier League last season. So I think he's probably the go-to option at Arsenal, despite being in the mid-priced midfielder bracket. What do you think about Saka?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think he is the go-to. Like, I look across the rest of that team and I can't see myself investing in Aubameyang or Lacazette, but I can see myself spending a little bit of money on Arsenal, because I do think that they're buying the right people. Like, there's a lot of chatter, and hopefully they're going to get Ben White. That will strengthen them. If they're defensively stronger with the likes of Tierney and Ben White at the back, that's going to create much more of a structure for them to go forward from. And we've seen how, when Arteta has played the youth, when he's been playing the likes of Saka and Smith Rowe, everything has been so much more positive about that Arsenal side. So Saka, even cheaper Smith Rowe, both of them I think could be good, nice, cheap enablers. And they're ones that, what I like about these guys is you don't mind benching them at 6.5. Like, you can happily go, well, the fixtures aren't great, so I'll leave them out. But you know that when they do play, they're going to be like 110%, because that's the way that they play their game. And that's not what you necessarily get from everybody that's on this graphic, but you will from Saka. So the underlying stats are fine. They're not the best in the world. They're not the worst in the world either. But I think in part that was because there was a lot of, it wasn't the best season ever for Arsenal last season, let's put it that way. They had a difficult time of it, very little from Aubameyang, and that has a knock-on effect on the rest of the side when your main guy isn't performing as you would want him to. So going into the season, pre-season seems to be going well, making good signings. Saka for me is one that is definitely on my radar as a player that I don't think I'm going to own for game week 1, but from first wildcard will likely come in.
Yeah, definitely one to monitor. I think it goes from the same with Chelsea. If Aubameyang's underperforming, if Pepe's underperforming, if Lacazette's underperforming, then he does limit his potential. But if Arsenal start well, if Aubameyang get a few goals, Pepe has been talked about that he could have a good season. So Saka maybe being the provider, I think that furthers his FPL potential, so definitely one to consider. I was considering having him from the start of the season, but I don't know. I think there are better options that we've been discussing on here, but definitely one to monitor anyway. Right, a couple more players. We've got James Rodriguez and Pedro Netto to talk about. James Rodriguez, for me, I think there's talk about him moving or something like that, but that's just speculation, and we don't know what Everton are going to line up under Benitez, how they're going to approach their attacking style. So it's an interesting one. His injury seems to be always around, so that always can come back. And every time I see him play, the opposition team just absolutely destroy his ankles, and you just see him rolling about on the place every single time. So it's always a chance that he gets another injury. It's just excruciating.
It's a tough one, this, because I kind of feel like he's not there to play under Benitez, and Benitez isn't kind of known for his dealings with big ego players, and I feel like James Rodriguez is a big ego player. Like, Benitez is good at kind of, like, his underlying stats for the teams where he's managed that haven't been champions of anything are really positive. And I think in part that's because when I was reading about him, he likes to drill the players, repeat the same thing. And that's the sort of thing I can imagine James Rodriguez going,
no, you're right.
I don't want to do that. Whereas there's a lot of players at Everton that I think will just buy into that rhetoric, and you can see them kind of just they're workhorses and they'll work hard. I'm not sure that James Rodriguez, one, is that personally, or also has the fitness level to do that also because of his injury record. So whether he stays or not will be interesting to see. But if I'm going Everton attack, I'm going Calvert-Lewin. I'm not going Rodriguez.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Calvert-Lewin is definitely in my side. I think he's one of the players I haven't switched around. So and we definitely don't want to triple up on Everton.
Oh no! Even with the nice fixtures, triple Everton feels way too involved.
Oh yes, I mean it's even a stretch at double Everton with Luca Dean. So and it's an interesting one. I think Rodriguez probably passes us by as well. Last one we're going to talk about today is Pedro Netto, and we're in a Wolves side with Raul Jimenez back. So
Yay!
Everyone's favourite. He's an FPL god. I just don't think that anyone could possibly go Pedro Netto when they have the opportunity to buy Raul Jimenez, and that's probably the reasoning for not to have him.
That's definitely true. But new manager, much more of an attacking-minded manager. I can see Neto having a big impact. Neto and Neves, I can see them being the impact players behind Jimenez. I think there's scope with this one. I really do. I think at 6.5, you're not necessarily, and the fixtures are all right. So you don't need to jump on board straight away, but you can afford to watch the first couple of games under the new manager, and then make a move with first wildcard territory for someone like Neto, for Neves, for Jimenez also. I think he comes into that bracket too. Seeing how that new side lines up and seeing whether they can kind of deal with the change from being much more defensively minded to being much more aggressive, which is what I'm expecting them to be going into this season. So I think there's potential, but I would want to see him start with a bang before I would invest.
I think you've nailed it there. I think we have to wait and see what the new manager does. But because I think in pre-season he wants to try out a 4-4-2 formation, and that's going to play a massive part as to Neto's effectiveness. If they play a 4-4-2, he will probably play left mid rather than left wing, which probably limits the amount that he can maraud forward. There's also talk of Ait-Nouri playing in that left mid spot. He was playing quite further up. So I don't know what the personnel change is going to be. We don't know whether Neto gets in every single game. He probably does because he's a very decent player. Maybe Traore on the right. But we're just not quite sure on the lineup. And I think if he can be a provider to Jimenez, then great. We might be considering a double up at Wolves further down the line. They certainly don't have a good fixtures to start off with. I think they have 3 really difficult ones. But then, from game week 4 to game week 14, they have an exceptional run of fixtures. Yeah. So maybe that's the time to consider Pedro Neto. Sure.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think you've got time to wait. You've got pre-season to watch the first 3 fixtures. And then round about game week 4, when you're starting to think, well, for a lot of managers, we'll be starting to think about wildcard. That feels like the time when you're going to get aboard a Wolves bandwagon of some kind, depending upon how the new manager sets them up.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that's the lot. I think we will leave it there. Thank you so much for joining me, Sam. Enjoyed our discussion about mid-priced midfielders. I'm a changed man on Dele Alli, so dare I say...
Blame me if it all goes wrong.
We will see whether I actually put him in my side or not, but it might be a wait and see. I'm all credit to you for putting him in your FPL side.
Dun, dun, dun.
Best of luck for the new season, and I will speak to you soon.
Take care, Ted.
Bye.
Bye.